Okay, yeah. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Big Blue Bent podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Joseph. We've been off for a little extended break here, almost a couple of weeks, but with me is almost like our regular panel of four. So we've got Dr. Roy Eappen, our endocrinologist and internal medicine specialist, and of course, the upcoming candidate for the PCQ in the provincial election, presumably in October, maybe earlier. We'll see. Christine Maydossian, advisor over at Ryan Affaires Publiques, back with us. As she of course in the past worked on Parliament Hill and for the city of Toronto for the late Mayor Rob Ford, and of course Robert Presser is back. Strategist, former PC candidate in the riding of Mount Royal, op-ed writer, you name it, wine connoisseur, wine and many types of alcohol connoisseur for sure. Now usually I try to introduce Robert near the end, but sorry, at the top, but this time I went to the end because I think we're going to focus this show a lot about the whole situation in Ukraine. We've touched on it in about the last two episodes, but of course, now we're a couple of weeks into it since Putin started his what he calls the denazification process. But I wanted to start with Robert here because Robert, you wrote I thought was a fantastic op-ed piece in the suburban newspaper locally, within a limited number of words, trying to lay it all out, implications for, if the geopolitical implications for us here at home, well summarized. That was, of course, in last week's edition. Robert, so, let's start with where do we think Putin is going here? Where's Ukraine going? Where's the world response going? What are you seeing right now in your crystal ball?
Well, the initial plan was supposed to literally recreate Blitzkrieg, the German term for lightning war, that he was supposed to march in and face very little resistance and seize all the critical facilities, including the major cities, within the first week. Clearly, that did not happen. So what you're seeing now, which is the deliberate attack on civilians, is a plan to create chaos. Because if you create chaos on the ground for the regular population, you divert resources from the war and from the resistance. So you create panic getting out of the country, you create panic in the country, and it creates a certain level of disorganization among the, say, reservists and even regular males who are now taking up arms against the Russians. The Russians have suffered tremendous casualties. And this lineup of who knows how many kilometers long it is now of mechanized army outside of Kiev would generally split to surround the city, but it hasn't moved yet. And there was actually an excellent article in one of the papers on the weekend hypothesizing why it hasn't moved yet. And I have another one I'm going to add to the pile, which is Putin is begging the West to equip the Ukrainians to attack this column from the air. And this whole discussion about giving the Poles former Russian fighters and the Americans replacing them, where do you think they're going to send those fighters if they get competent pilots in their cockpits? They're going to send them to attack that column. And then, to me, Putin would use that as an excuse to say, I have been attacked by NATO because this is actually NATO aircraft. I don't care who's in the seat, who are going after my mechanized forces. And he hinted earlier in the week that he believes that the sanctions being imposed by not only the West, by a broader number of world powers, are also, in effect, a declaration of war. So I think he's creating a package where he would have an excuse to lash out against a weaker NATO member, to try to enlarge the war, to try to split the cohesive approach that NATO has presented so far. Like if you lob a few shells into, I don't know, southeastern Poland, the Poles are going to want to go and assert a no-fly zone. The rest of Western Europe, including Germany, I'm not so sure. So I think Putin is setting things up both to cut power and water to the major cities, to grab all the nuclear plants so he can literally shut down the electricity in most of the country. And he's looking for an excuse to create a wider war because it looks like he can't win this one with his conventional plan that he initially had in mind when he invaded.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair to say, and the only thing, it's been a situation in the world. If you really think about it, these kind of major attacks usually wrap themselves up usually within a few weeks. It's not the old days of years and years, unless you're talking about civil wars and that stuff. So in that, it almost feels like it's a crazy chess game. But Putin does all that. He's going to have a battle with his own people, especially if it turns into a protracted battle, and the body count on his end keeps piling up, right?
Yeah, but also part of the problem is that the Russian regulars who have been pushed into service are not the greatest fighters. They
No,
also have a problem where they're fighting people who share what in many ways is a common ethnicity and a common language base. They're fighting people who are too much like their own. If they were fighting, I don't know, Finns or the French or
Chechens,
some kind of foreign culture, it would be easier for them to be more aggressive, which is why they're now shelling from afar as opposed to moving a mechanized column and trying to assert control over major urban areas.
yeah, I think part of the problem may be just the road network to get those ground, to get those tanks and patrols in. I think it's kind of limiting so far, or maybe that's from the attack. Anyway, Dr. Roy, I know you're
frozen. The problem is that the ground was supposed to be frozen and it's not frozen.
It's not
which means
frozen.
you can't take your mechanized army off the roads.
No, exactly. Doc, you've been nodding a lot, so what would you like to jump in on here?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of obscure Orthodox Church politics going on. The ecumenical patriarch, His All Holiness Bartholomew, about a year and a half ago, granted autocephaly to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which basically took it away from the patriarch in Moscow. These are people of basically the same religion, basically the same people, and they're literally bombing their cousins. And I don't know how long the Russians are going to be able to get their people to do that. There are widespread protests in Russia. They arrested 4,000 or 5,000 people over the weekend. I'm told that a lot of Putin's own people in Putin's own cabinet didn't know this was going to happen before it happened. And they're just afraid to try and stop him because they've thrown in their lot with Putin. I'm also hearing that there are a lot of Chinese parts in the mechanized divisions of the Soviet, the Russians, and a lot of these things are breaking down along the way. That the supply chains are in really bad shape to this long column. They're not getting food. They're not getting fuel. And I'm not sure how long this is going to take. And even if some horror happened and he were able to occupy Ukraine, occupying a country of 40 million people, the second largest in all of Europe, is not going to be an easy thing to do. It's going to cost a lot of blood and treasure. The Russian economy is in free fall. I think the latest I saw is $1 is 155 rubles. I mean, it was about 22 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe 10 or 12 years ago. The Russian stock market was closed down. I think it may just have reopened, but everything's in free fall. a lot of the Russian oil industry is being abandoned by Western countries, and so it's going to be harder for them to pump oil. They're not going to get the latest technology in how to pump oil, and their factories and stuff that process oil are going to lose parts and stuff are going to be harder and harder to get. This is an economic catastrophe for Russia. Maybe Putin doesn't care because he's got $80 billion stashed somewhere, but I'm hearing even some of his own oligarch friends are having trouble. So.
Okay. Yeah, I may get back to the oil in 1 second, but Christine, I want to get your thought, because we haven't seen you in a while. So your thoughts about what's going on here in general.
So I mean, as somebody who saw war in the region about a year and a half ago, a war that wasn't much different than what we see today, I could say that there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. And I think I mentioned that in the past. It's interesting that we're going to be into the third week of the war very soon. We've been imposing sanctions the entire time. I don't want to say they're not working, but they're not helping stop the tragedies. And I was reading perspectives from different parts of the world, and by imposing sanctions on Russia, we're making China richer. So what we're not selling to Russia, they're now buying from China. So it's just interesting to see where this will go in the next few weeks. I was watching Ian Bremmer, who is the head of the Eurasia Group, speak a couple of days ago. And he said, people are asking me, when will the end be? What will be the end of this? And he says, the answer to that is that there will be no end, because this is the new world order. That's scary, right? You think about the ability, the military capability that both sides have and are willing to use if it really comes down to it. And it's not pleasant. Look, I mean, I can't even watch those scenes anymore of children and women and elders in such a state. I mean, I saw an image of an older woman sitting with a hunting rifle in front of her house saying that, I'm not leaving, which is something we saw a lot during our war in Artsakh a year and a half ago. But that happened. Nothing was said, nothing was done, and now it happens again. So I think the West has a lot of reflecting to do with respect to, if this is how things are going to move forward, and if economic sanctions don't seem to be working, at least thus far, right? Sure, the Russian economy is not what it was 3 weeks ago, or even 10 years ago, in 2014, I guess, when they invaded and annexed Crimea. Fine, but at the same time, this is happening. It's a reality, right? And what do we need to do to? I mean, stopping it is difficult, but what can we do to at least find a way out, or to look for peace? Because this won't end with the Ukraine. If we're not able to find a way, if the West is not able to find a way with Putin, I mean, his own friends aren't able to find a way with him. You've got a billionaire, Russian billionaire, Abramovich, who owns a Chelsea soccer club, who out of just, anxiety decided to sell it, and said that he would give the proceeds of the sale to Ukrainians who are, seeking refuge. I mean, if that is not doing anything, not much else will. And more people will die. There will be more destruction. The Western economy will suffer because, and I think that's something that we really need to think about, because again, if we stop selling Adidas track pants, for example, to Russia, they will resort to their other allies like China, like Iran, like India hasn't been very vocally against this. You know, there are many Arab countries who are still purchasing oil from Russia. I mean, you know, we really have to think about the other side to this. And that's kind of the things that have been going on in my head.
You still
Yeah, and
need
that's
people, you still need people who can talk to Putin. I mean, one of the most interesting things we've seen over the weekend is
Naftali Bennett. Yeah.
Yes.
on the Sabbath goes and flies to Moscow to hold a meeting with Putin, and then calls Zelensky. Clearly, there's a trio of interveners here that in 10 or 20 years, we're going to see a book written by somebody who knows the real story. You've got Naftali Bennett, you've got the president of Turkey, Erdogan, and then you have Macron, who is an unlikely covert diplomat. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Out of all the bodies, maybe out of the current gang of Western European leaders, Macron is now, scarily so, the most reasonable and most experienced of all of them. So I don't think this is going to be a short-term affair. I think this is a long-term affair. It's going to be a meat grinder. You're going to have arms for an insurrection pouring across the borders of Moldova, Romania, and Poland, even the Baltic states. The West is going to fund and fuel an insurrection in Ukraine. My prediction is that before this thing ends, that Putin will use a tactical battlefield nuclear weapon. If he's pushed to an impossible military situation, use one, just a small one, but he'll use it to demonstrate to the West that you guys better chill, because if you keep feeding this insurrection, I'm going to accidentally lob one into NATO territory, and then you're going to have a decision to make. But you know, if you go back through half a century of Cold War conventional ground war doctrine, it was expected that Soviet forces would be able to overwhelm Western forces. Yeah. Because, you know, it would be like in medieval times where you threw in the Irish. First, you would throw in the satellite countries. You would have used the forces of the former Soviet satellites to attack the West. And then after a little bit of beating up, then you would send in the capable Russian troops. But now, most of those countries are members of NATO. So you've got poorly trained, unmotivated Russian ground forces who are not performing against a technically and numerically inferior adversary. So the generals in NATO are now looking at this and going, you know what, if we had to mount a ground war and wipe them out and push them all the way back into Russia, provided there is no nuclear option for anybody, they could probably do it. But they would be laying waste to the entire terrain between where they start and where they finish.
And hence why they probably are not, you know, they haven't been enthusiastic about the idea of making Ukraine a no-fly zone, because then you're just triggering a greater level of conflict.
If they can win, and they never thought for a half a century that they could actually win a conventional war. Now they can, given their performance so far. There's a lot of rethinking going on in NATO strategy at the moment.
Well, I think we actually overestimated the Soviet strength. We discovered once the Berlin Wall fell that a lot of their weapon systems were held together by rubber bands and chewing gum. You know, these MiG fighters that look so capable were really not that advanced in technology. In fact, the Polish are trying to give away their MiG fighters to the Ukrainians to get F-16s, which I find very interesting. I agree with pretty much everything you've said, Robert, and I have a question for you. Do you think that the Russians, as a face-saving maneuver, would accept a Ukrainian promise not to join NATO maybe to eventually join the EU, but not to join NATO as an excuse to stop this craziness?
If they were to accept that kind of deal, there would have to be some kind of mutual security arrangement from both sides, both from the West and the East, that no one would attempt to militarily secure their territory ever again. But this is not like obliterating Syria. If you look at the damage that's been done, look, Syria, unfortunately, as a country, has no strategic value, no economic value.
Yep.
So the fact that they laid Syria to waste cost effectively nothing. So laying waste to Ukraine, which has mineral deposits, had a functioning economy, this is serious stuff. And so who's going to get together? And probably in just 3 weeks, there's $100 to $200 billion of damage. This thing goes on for a month, right? There's trillions of dollars of infrastructure damage to Ukraine that you're going to have to fix. Who's paying that bill? This isn't like the Marshall Plan anymore, where the victors were generating all kinds of excess cash flow and they could afford to rebuild Western Europe. Nobody can afford to fix this stuff at the moment.
That kind of begs the question, and there's been a very passionate response in the global community. We've seen it with the assorted we're doing a lot of like financial maneuvers that really haven't been truly tested before to see an effect. But the one concern that from a sanctions, I'm just concerned that we're maybe overdoing it a little bit, if only because the concern that China could come in, right away. Global producers getting out of oil interests with the Russians. China could go in and sweep them in on the cheap. This notion in Russia, we've seen all these companies pulling out operations out of Russia. The ones that really concern me the most right now, of all people, Visa, MasterCard coming out of there. I mean, China has one of the largest payment processing companies in the world in UnionPay. UnionPay could go walk in there and basically create a monopoly on in no time flat.
They
right?
have.
And they essentially have.
Yeah.
These could have major long-term repercussions going, and we're not thinking it because we've gotten so impassioned with the images that we see coming out of Ukraine. Of course, some of them are absolutely horrible. I mean, what's going on in particular, I of all places, I look at Mariupol down in the southwest, which is a port city down by my Azov Sea. I remember my Ukrainian Russian geography over by the Azov Sea. Although interestingly enough, all this destruction in Mariupol, which by the way has quite a large Jewish population and a Greek population of all things. But it's interesting that the Russians have been doing horrific things over there, but they really haven't gotten in on Odessa, which is a huge port into the Black Sea. Which, again, it's kind of funny watching this because, obviously the Russians have been re-entrenching their positions to the southeast, in the Donetsk, Donbass regions, of course, and Kiev, they're coming kind of close and they hit some things in Kiev, but they really haven't gone into the full thrust into just taking Kiev and putting in the puppet government and what have you. And really to the western part of the whole country, really not much going on from what I can tell, unless there's something quiet. So, are to some extent, is the West overdoing it in terms of the sanctions and the corporate departures and stuff like that? I don't know. I'm open on this one, Robert.
I think we've yet to see the ultimate effect of those sanctions.
Yeah.
And I think the sanctions are going to hit the Russian public with a great deal more severity than the Russian establishment, be it military, political, or the oligarchs. I think the sanctions are ultimately going to provoke a popular uprising among the Russian people. And I'm sure there are all kinds of overtures underway, covert channels of communication
Yeah.
to Russian military leaders who are essentially saying to them, the way Lindsey Graham said publicly this year, the only way, this past week, sorry, the only way we're going to stop this thing is if there's regime change and somebody takes out Putin. Now, conveniently, it was a Lindsey Graham who said it, and not a person from the whack job side of the Republican Party,
Yeah.
and not a crazy leftist Democrat, but interestingly, somebody who is respected for his knowledge of international affairs on both sides of the aisle. And it's true. He said publicly what a lot of people have been saying and thinking privately. So if the war continues to go badly and 20 to 30,000 body bags come back across the Russian border, you do have a chance of a popular uprising and somebody going to take out Putin. And if Putin is at his dacha hidden somewhere, you know what? A cruise missile with a small nuclear warhead will solve that problem. So ironically, my prediction of the use of a single nuclear warhead may be against Putin himself. Now you might say, Robert, aren't you insane? But anything is possible under these conditions.
Yes.
You don't know what's going to happen.
Well, listen, if you think about it throughout the course of Russian history, Russian leaders usually don't have very good endings. They don't go out very clear. Yeltsin, Gorbachev, reasonably okay. Yeltsin, I guess, got out okay. But usually, you know what? They don't end pleasantly.
Yeah, Yeltsin's liver was the size of Moldova when he died.
Well, that too.
That was different.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
I actually have Russian friends who have family still in Russia, and they tell me the problem with that scenario is that there is a large part of the Russian elite that go along with what Putin is doing, and you would have to kill a whole bunch of people, not just Putin, to eliminate this cancer that is affecting the Russians. Everyone keeps telling me that Putin is crazy. I don't think he's crazy. I think he's trying to do what Russians have tried to do over the last several hundred, if not 1,000 years, is to maintain the Russian Empire. So I don't think we should make the mistake of saying he's crazy. Ill-advised, maybe. The planning on this seems not to have. I would have expected a quick march to Kiev and overthrow the government within 5 days. It's already 2 weeks, and you're hearing stories of Russian kids telling their mothers that they're suddenly in Ukraine when they were supposed to be on exercises somewhere else. I think it's a Sting song said that the Russians love their children too.
Yeah.
That's cute. Christine, you want to jump in?
I sort of become numb to all of this because it emotionally distraught me for a long time, and it wasn't just me; it was everybody that I knew. I think you're all right. I think that, and Dr. Roy, I think you said something very important. Is and that's that. Maybe from the outside, we think that, Putin is not as popular, but on the inside, and it's not just in Russia, it's in a lot of the Soviet countries that sort of
very true.
Or former Soviet countries, I'm sorry, that see Putin as their protector. And I tell you that because even in our war, Russia came in to save the Armenians. I'm not saying that they did, but that was the way it was seen. So that's why I say that there is so much that happens behind the scenes in that part of the world that the West is not aware of. That's why, it's important that we take maybe a modified approach to what we're doing. The sanctions will only do so much. And it's true, it is going to impact the middle class more than it's going to impact anyone else. Guess what? The elites, they funnel their money through their own private banks. They have their own deals with their friends around the world. You're talking about some of the most powerful and wealthy people in the world. they're not going to be impacted by sanctions. And we fail to see that. Yeah, some of the oligarchs that have American investments and, their Lamborghinis have been taken in their boats in the south of France. I mean, these people, sure, the guy's pissed off. He bought a collectible Lamborghini for whatever, $3 million. Somebody took it, he wants to drive in the summer in Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat. He won't be able to, sure, right? But I think that there's a larger picture here. And I say that from a perspective, I don't live in Armenia, but I mean, I say that from a perspective where I've grown to understand the region a lot more actually in the past few years. And I mean, we've been talking about this in my community and my family for my whole life. So I mean, I understand the dynamic a little bit. So yeah, I definitely think that, we don't, and we only hear what the West reports, right? We don't hear what they report, whether they're right or they're wrong. We don't know what they're saying. We don't know exactly what's happening there. So even with respect to casualties and parts of Ukraine that have been sort of intercepted and invaded. I mean, so I would like to see the West take a different approach, a modified approach, perhaps, because in my eyes, the victims of all of this are those poor people, right?
Yeah.
And I can't take seeing that anymore. It's gotten to a point where, yes, I'm numb to it, but, at the same time, it's like, I see that and I think of, my country and my people and the same things that they went through. And it hurts. And I'm sure everybody feels that for, what their ancestors have gone through, but it's not fair. It's not fair. You see children, being born in these bunkers.
Yep.
Right. Like, what kind of a life is that? It's not fair, and we can do better. We can do better to put in, maybe not an end to this, but to make this better, at least a little bit.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, I think some of what Dr. Roy had pointed out, because I've known quite a few Russians in my time, I actually agree. I don't think Putin is that crazy. I mean, he's obviously a monster, and there's some passion issues there, but there are still a lot of Russian, maybe not as much as there were 20, 30, 40 years ago. I do believe there are a lot of Russians who still are fond of this concept of Mother Russia. And Putin is trying to tap into that. This whole notion of denazification. I mean, obviously we know President Zelensky is Jewish. It's kind of silly. But if he uses a word like that, we know it does push a button on a lot of Russians, because we talk about how we despise the Nazis, the Jewish people and whatever despise the Nazis. For the Russian people, Nazi is just a dirty word for them. They from a trade relationship, they'll try to get along with Germany, but on a personal level, there's still a lot of unsettled feelings going back to World War II and the number of Russians that were killed by the Nazis. They care, the Russian people, there's a lot, they can carry a grudge a long time. So Germany, they carry it a lot. And I got news for you, to a large extent, even with the Americans, there's still people that, they're a little bit hostile and distrustful of the Americans. And I can only think of, there's numerous of these corporate stories of, large corporations that have now recently come in there in the last 20, 30 years. And I know two of them right off. I mean, Coca-Cola and McDonald's, both of those organizations went there. Those were not orchestrated by Americans. Those were orchestrated by, actually, both those cases, Canadians, because Americans would not be able to get it done. So they would do other countries that, the Russians might have a little softer opinion of, and that inevitably got deals done and got the entrances of these companies. So I think to some extent, I know Putin's obviously tapping into that distrust. Whether he's successful or obviously we're going to see, but I see, very similar to what we saw in Afghanistan. It was kind of tolerated at the start, but as this thing got prolonged and the body bags piled up, the Russian the Russian people just didn't like it and they had to get out of there. This might happen sooner. I think sanctions in general, I think you need at least a few weeks to see. You have to give them a few weeks to really kick in. It's hard for things to go immediately. So I think we're going to kind of see it more. I think now, as we get into, let's say, a month into this, I think we'll start to really see if the Russian people are mad enough and how they vent it. It's going to be interesting. But let's go back now. Let's go to like global leaders. Before we even get to Trudeau, I'm just curious. Joe
You just
Biden.
called Trudeau a global leader.
Well, I'm gonna try. But before we get there, takes on anything's happened with the Russia. It's always what has America done? How do we rate how Joe Biden has handled things so far? Anybody want to maybe Robert?
Well, let's not forget that Joe Biden has come to the White House with the most foreign policy experience and exposure
For sure.
since Richard Nixon.
Yeah.
Now, regardless of what you think of Nixon, Nixon's foreign policy set the stage for the next half century of the world evolution, with normalizing relationship with China, getting out of Vietnam. I mean, that can be a whole other 3-hour show just on
For sure.
he didn't achieve. But you have somebody who knows the players and who understands what can happen on the ground. And to me, if you look at the number of people around him, from his national security advisor to Antony Blinken, these are not ideologues. These are practical people who are not married to a doctrine or a philosophy, and who are going to look at their inbox every day and say, what's the right and reasonable thing to do? So I have confidence that they will manage the situation. I'm kind of afraid of what a George H.W. Bush would have done, surrounded by the ideologues who were present in that cabinet at the time when faced with something like this. Colin Powell told George Jr. when he went into Iraq, you break it, you own it. And Putin has forgotten, in a way, that lesson, where if he lays waste to Ukraine, it's going to be completely ungovernable. And the more he lays waste to it, the less chance he has of asserting control over the country. And so Biden, I think, has to play a long game. He has to keep NATO in line. In a way, it's been easy for him because NATO has kept itself in line. Stoltenberg is a fantastic head of NATO. The best I have seen in my memory of NATO leadership.
He's a diplomat, Robert.
Right. So you've got the right people with the right temperament in place right now in the West. And thankfully, Boris in London has, made his little bit of noise, and the new Chancellor of Germany knows absolutely nothing and is totally out of his depth. He's kind of keeping quiet. So Macron is now the senior leader in Europe, as I mentioned before, kind of scary, but even he's doing what he has to do. So everybody's behaving at the moment. If we can keep this up for another month, it'll be great.
So I see several storm clouds on that horizon. Macron goes into elections in the next month or so. I don't remember exactly when the French presidential elections are going.
First round soon.
Yeah.
It's quite soon. So I'm not sure. I think he'll probably win, but there's quite a lot of opposition to him right now. The Germans have been a great disappointment to me for the last 25 years. Angela Merkel closed the last German nuclear plant within the last 6 months, basically enabling Putin. I mean, the last chancellor of Germany, Schroeder, was on the board of Gazprom. I'm sure he's resigned by now, but you know, And then the Americans are going, from what I'm hearing, are going to sign that Iran nuclear deal any moment now. I mean, isn't that a really bad idea right now? So yes, there are good things, but there are also morons in the background too.
And there's a lot that we don't even know.
And we'll never
Yeah.
know.
Exactly.
That's the part that, I mean, sometimes I listen to, some of the pundits speak on television, and I think, fine, but at the same time, we know very little. We don't know what Macron and Putin spoke about. We don't know what happened last weekend when Naftali was in Moscow. We don't know, well, Boris Johnson, I don't think Putin even gives him the time of day. We don't know what broke out between Biden and Putin before he decided to do this. We don't know, right? I mean, it's diplomacy. There's a book, it's my favorite book, by Henry Kissinger called Diplomacy.
Yep.
And if you read between the lines, he tells some of the secrets of the 20th century in that book.
He does.
And I mean, and these are things he reveals, sometimes 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years after they happened. And you think, wow, okay, that's how it happened. But that's the world we're living in. There are a lot of unknowns. So, I mean, again, my heart breaks for the people that are the victims, of petty arguments at the end of the day. That's what wars are created by, power struggles and envy and lack of access to whatever resources. I mean, look at the Ukraine. The Ukraine is probably one of the most resource rich countries of Europe.
For sure.
So, and a major agricultural hub.
I was going to say grain.
Between Russia and the Ukraine, you're talking 50-60% of the world's grains.
Yep.
I mean, we could see major problems with food supply from all of this.
Yeah. And from what I understand, I mean, countries like the UAE continue to buy all their grain from Russia, right?
Yeah.
China, India.
Yeah, just imagine if there was only a large country in the world that loaded with natural resources, ethical oil and ethical grain. I just trying to think if there's such a country. You know what? And on that note, let's go to the longest serving leader in the G7 currently. How is our friend Mr. Trudeau been handling this so far? We know he's now on his European, Jolie was over there for a few days. She was going to fix everything up, and Freeland talks from wherever she talks from. And now Trudeau, I think he just landed in Latvia a couple hours before this recording. So how is our friend Mr. Trudeau in a country that might, if you really put it together, could produce a lot of ethical grain and ethical oil and ethical LNG gas, and also how's Trudeau do? How do you think Trudeau's doing, folks? Dr. Roy?
Well, let's look at something like Keystone XL, a wholly Democrat shot on itself. The Americans are now trying to close down some of their biggest fracking sites, and they closed down the Keystone XL, and now they're begging the Saudis to make more oil for them. It's hilarious.
To make up to so they can cut off the Russian supply and find. I have to laugh at this.
Even crazier than that. We're trying to actually say we're going to decrease the sanctions on Venezuela.
Yeah.
See, this is what country like China wants, right? For example,
exactly.
Or whatever. Us, sanctioning Russia is only helping China develop its economy even further.
Yeah, but if Trudeau's so tied into China, it may almost be deliberate. No?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm talking about everything, right?
Yeah.
Food, textiles, grains, spare parts. I mean, even it's funny because you see some of the stocks of these these aerospace companies plummeting because a lot of the private jets that are Russian owned are now taken hostage. Like the Boeing stock plummeted to like 180 something.
Yeah.
Earlier last week.
And yet other defense stocks have gone through the roof.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Lockheed Martin, right? So it's like,
Yep.
you know, like, well, and so it's just, you know, I mean, what are we doing here? If it's making a difference, great, right? But what are we doing here in the long term? Are we making things worse for ourselves, for our economies, for our future, for our debts, for our resources, for our Arctic sovereignty, et cetera, right?
But we're already going to have a recession. Americans and Canadians, you know, $5-6 gas in the US, $2.50 here.
For sure.
You know, Canadians can suffer 2 of 3 things at once: high interest rates, high taxes, high gas. You can't have all 3. And we're going to have rising interest rates.
Yeah.
We've got inflation through the roof. We now have high gas prices. And Trudeau was going to raise taxes in the next budget but now, you know, all bets are off. But, you know, the rate hikes that the central banks were planning are now probably shelved.
Yeah. I don't think they have a choice, or at worst, it's going to be half of what they intended at maybe, if that.
Yeah.
I don't know how they can.
Well, they just raised the prime rate a quarter.
25
25
point, yeah,
basis-
25 basis
25
points.
basis
So what?
points.
But it's not 3%. It's not 3.5%
No,
again. It went
but there are
from
a lot of people out there living at the very edge of their mortgage, where, you know, taking out $2 million mortgages and increasing by 1 or 2% is the difference between owning the house and, you know, not owning the house.
okay, but that's their own fault. All right. Everybody
I
Exactly.
agree.
that
I
real
agree.
estate is cyclical. Now, it might have a long cycle, but the longer it goes, very often the harder it falls. And in Toronto, look,
Yeah.
I was around in Toronto between 89 and 91.
There was
was
a
I.
crash.
I was watching. Okay, so then you all remember what a real estate correction looked like in a city that was grossly overpriced at the time.
Oh boy, do I
It
remember it well.
absolutely happened again.
And
Yeah.
it's even worse. The overpricing is much worse now than it was in the 80s.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, average
Financial numbers, financial engineering.
600,000 square, 600,000.
No,
600 square feet. 600.
Yeah.
Yeah, 600 square feet.
600
Average
square feet average is about $1 million.
well,
Which
the
is
average.
insane.
Between like 875 and $1 million.
What was it? The average sale price period in Toronto last quarter time was $2 million. This is
Yeah.
My brother's place is not even 600 square feet, and he paid almost $700,000 for it.
It's
That's Manhattan pricing.
yeah, but like I said before all this went down, you would have thought probably the simple strategy that the Bank of Canada could have used is to listen. We dropped 125, 150 basis points very, very quickly at the start of the pandemic. You'd figure, well, scoop that. Okay, you probably in increments of 25 to 50 points at a time. Put that back in place. Probably sit back a little bit, then see when you can go farther. Now I don't even think you can do that. I don't see how. But the shameful part, you know what? Actually, let before we get too far off tangent, Robert, how do you think Trudeau's been faring through managing the Ukraine situation, or should we say Freeland?
I think the fact that it has pushed a whole lot of other misery off the agenda, and we're focusing on the war and rallying Canadians behind Ukraine. This is the best thing that could have happened to him politically. Period. This is wonderful for him. He gets to go overseas, consult with our allies. Melanie Joly has been fabulously scripted. She has not messed up once. She hasn't advanced an independent thought, but I'm okay with that. That's fine. She is conveying the message as a young, capable, intelligent woman. This is the modern face of Canadian diplomacy. It's perfect. Okay. And she's following the script. I know because I flew abroad and I was in business class, and she was sitting 2 seats over from me, and I saw the size of her briefing book. And let me tell you, she is very, very, very well briefed, and she's reading stuff, because I swear to you, she spent 5 hours reading it on this flight to Europe.
Hey.
It was interesting. It was interesting to see Trudeau in London today. He met the sovereign, Her Majesty the Queen, without a mask. But
Maskless.
apparently, Boris and the Prime Minister of the Netherlands are unclean, so he had to wear a mask. I mean,
Yeah, I saw
the pure theater of this is truly remarkable.
It is theater. That's what it is. I mean,
and the other comment that I would make is that the Dutch journalist said, Trudeau doesn't really answer any questions. Like, I mean, and I'm sure the Canadian journalists must be going, what do you mean? Not our Trudeau. Our Trudeau knows how to answer questions. He answered with the usual word salad. I never understand what he's saying at the best of times. But Robert is absolutely right. This is exactly what he needed. He needed a war somewhere else to get the idea off of. 47% of Canadians think less of him since his handling of the truckers and all of the other stuff.
What truckers? We had truckers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what the heck was that? What was that all about?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I kind of remember something.
Yeah, there was but but seriously,
martial law.
But also part of me says, I'm just always wondering, would Trudeau's taken he's been a little tougher than he's usually been on stuff. Well, I can't say much. He imposed the Emergencies Act on honking trucks. A part of me also always just wonders also, would he have taken this tough a stand from what he can do, from the best that he can do for Canada? If is there a feeling that maybe Freeland's pushing a lot of these buttons and he's just kind of like the showman who just puts on this
electoral politics as well. The Ukrainian minority, the diaspora in this country is among the largest
for sure
of any country. I think we have 1.4 million people of Ukrainian origin, which rivals the Indian diaspora in this country, I might add. So, to be perfectly cynical about this stuff, but I mean, let me tell you, this whole Ukraine situation breaks my heart.
Of course.
But from a purely political calculus, I'm sure that they think that this is good for electoral politics, and then remember, these are micro targeters. That's the way they think.
Okay, well, speaking of electoral politics, let's just bring it all home. And at the same time, we finally, we haven't really touched on it, but now we have the rules in place. We finally are going to have officially a Conservative Party leadership contest again. That will wrap up on September 10th at a place to be determined with a mail-in ballot. Not going to have a long conversation on this. Obviously we're getting to the first deadlines coming up early next month, and that'll be the filing of the applications with the signatures and the $200,000 deposit and the $100,000 compliance fee. Thoughts on with the rate? I mean, obviously, there's not official applications in, but we've heard, Pierre Poilievre is obviously officially thrown, is saying so far that he's throwing his hat in his ring. Sounds like Jean Charest is going to officially throw his hat in the ring as early as Thursday. I'm hearing a lot with Patrick Brown. A couple hours ago, we did hear Tasha Keridan officially say she's dropping out, but backing Jean Charest. Thoughts on how this is shaping up? Robert, let's start with you again.
I have said before that I don't know if a progressive conservative can win a leadership race in the current state of the Conservative Party. Look, I am a longtime Charest loyalist and personal friend of nearly 40 years. Sure. He unhesitatingly has my support, and I believe for the country, he is the right person. I genuinely believe that. However, the party base has shifted to the West, We have a much more small C conservative on social issues party than we did under the progressive conservatives. So I am afraid for my friend. God, I hope he wins. For the sake of the country, I hope he wins. But I am doubtful because of where our members are.
Fair enough. Christine, you want to step into this quagmire?
Sure. I'm just really excited to see who else, we've got. I mean, Pierre's the only one that's dropped his name into the hat, but I think I'm really looking forward to seeing who else will do that, because we do need an exciting race. We don't want to crown somebody just for the sake of crowning somebody. We want to hear different perspectives of, how our conservative leaders want to, in which direction do they want to move the country? And I think that's going to be key. And we may think right now that, one person has a larger chance of winning than the others, but that might change during the race, right? We don't know. And I mean, I heard today, or I was reading something about how the electoral ridings are going to be redrawn across the country. I mean, they're not going to touch Quebec, but so that's also interesting. I mean, maybe the Liberals are up to something, so I don't know. But sorry,
You can never touch Quebec. No, Quebec.
No, they won't touch Quebec. But if they touch the West, it could have an impact on the Conservatives. So anyway, and I'm sure that's the intention behind all of this. But I think it's going to be really exciting. I mean, Jean Charest, we've been talking about it for a few weeks now. He was my childhood political hero. I will say that out loud. When I was in Brussels in 2009, he was there kind of spearheading the Canada-EU free trade agreement. And I was a big fan of that. I even wrote my paper on that, did a lot of research on that. So no, I do agree. I mean, he has a lot to give the country and a lot to offer conservatives, but the others may as well. So let's just wait to hear them all debate each other, and may the best man win, or woman.
Doctor, everybody talks to you somehow, some way. So here, just share your thoughts so far.
Look, I was a member of the PC party since I was 16 years old until the merger. I fought against my Reformed brothers and sisters for a long time, but I don't know if Charest is the man for today. He's not really been a force in the party for quite some time. I have not spoken to him, interestingly enough.
Okay.
Right.
What about Leslyn Lewis?
I'm sure I will. I have spoken to Leslyn.
Oh, there you go.
I've spoken to Pierre. I've spoken to Tasha. I'm sure at some point Mr. Charest will reach out. He's going to have to reach out to riding presidents and other people. I'll be interested to see what his policy proposals are. I mean, I get the impression that he's the reddest of red Tories, and I am not, and I cannot support that. So we'll see if he can change my mind. I'm open. I've made some decisions, but I'm still, and I agree with Christine. I do not want a coronation. We have a queen. We don't need someone crowned in the conservative leadership, and we need to do something in order to make sure that I hate these leadership races. I don't know about the rest of you. They irritate me to no end. Months and months and months of this.
Bring back delegate conventions.
Exactly.
Bring them back.
I love those delegate conventions.
Best television, the best television for a leadership contest. I
You know,
I love
people
it. I used to
walking
love
across
it.
and crossing the floor and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. That was fun. Do you remember those, Robert?
Yes, yes, I do.
I love. Listen, yeah. Listen, I want. I don't want to. Because I've said it, because people ask, where are you going to go? Where are you going to? And I say, listen, I've always heard the names Poilievre and Charest. I remember but I'm cognizant of the last leadership contest, and those were two of the first names that apparently popped up, and they were going to organize, and they had it, and Poilievre organized a massive team, and Charest even had commercials ready, and they both changed their minds at the last minute in their own way. So I hope they both run. I hope I hope no matter what comes of this, I hope we really I like the time frame that we're using. It's not going to be a protracted year and a half thing. I like Ian Brody running the leadership organizing committee on top. I think he's a more than capable man, a good person, good guy at the helm. They've created pretty much maybe a month too long, maybe too long, but pretty much the right length to do this in. I just hope that there are good, healthy debates about the conservative vision for Canada. I don't want this to be turned into a bashing race and this kind of, are you really a conservative or are you really a liberal? As much as I like Pierre, the person, I know where this is coming from, this kind of, Charest, a liberal kind of thing, I find completely unnecessary. Is not constructive to the debate. I want these guys. I know Charest is a great statesman. He did do a lot of good for Canada back in the 90s. When he came, he went into provincial politics. It was a good thing. It was to knock down Lucien Bouchard, and it was just after he was made his efforts in the referendum. Canada owes a lot to him for at least that. So on at least that, I don't care if you're a conservative, a liberal, a centrist. If he wants to come in, let him come in. Let him talk. Let him at least talk. And then in the end, it's what let the voters decide, but let's have those healthy debates, whether, Charest, the centrist, Leslyn Lewis, she's been a fantastic voice since she was in the last leadership race. She talked very well. You don't have to agree with everything she says, particularly maybe on the social conservative issues, but she speaks them well. She's very, very eloquent, at least in the English language. The French we know about that. Bring them in. Hopefully, we want a nice, well-rounded, we don't want 16, 17 candidates, but we want a nice round set of voices to really discuss the things and get to the things that most matter to Canadians, because in the end, we could be looking at an election about a year or so later, and we need to be ready. I'm not interested in this unite the party. Hopefully these guys focus on the issues and it doesn't turn into a bashing back and forth session. I'm not going to predict what's actually going to happen. I got a scary feeling right now. It may be not the way I'd like it to be, but hopefully it is. And I'm just putting that feeler out there. That's my sentiment. So anybody want to interject here somewhere?
I like the idea of a healthy debate. I think we've spent too much time post Harper harping on each other. And looking for weaknesses in each other. I think with respect to the leaders, at least, or the leadership candidates. So I think absolutely, let's talk about vision. Let's talk about the economy. Let's talk about getting the country back on track. Let's talk about real policy. And foreign policy, which is a big issue. I mean, we talked about it in the podcasts earlier last year, where we said, we even though it's not a big, focus right now, foreign policy is important for the Conservatives. We don't talk about it enough. Well, now we can talk about it because it's the focus of the world. So, let's take those two things, economic recovery and, good foreign policy, effective foreign policy, and let's turn that into a victory, because we can if we do it right.
That's it. Let's be, we always talk about ourselves as the big blue tent. We should be the big blue tent of ideas. I mean, we
Yeah.
seem to have forgotten that over the last few years, and shouldn't just be just the big blue tent of identities. It should be the big blue tent of ideas and constructive debate and discussion.
Absolutely agree. I keep I keep saying to people, I spend, I'm not a wealthy person. I do okay, but I
Yeah.
spend a lot of money giving to think tanks and other organizations for what Mr. Manning used to call political, the capital that we need to run campaigns and to run parties. The more ideas, the better. And I don't think we have enough of that here. I don't think we have enough people thinking of ways we should be doing things. I mean, I'm a big supporter of Kanzuk. I think that in a post U.S. Predominant world, it's good to ally ourselves with our closest allies and friends and form alliances that could be quite useful. The party did endorse that at the last convention from some of us putting that together. I think we need many more ideas to make this a great party. And I hope whoever wins and whoever loses, if Charest wins, I hope Pierre keeps on, and if Pierre wins, I hope Charest comes back into the party and works hard to get us elected.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Just before we wrap up, I kind of like this one topic we didn't cover last week, and I got a lot of talk about PJ O'Rourke after the last episode. So, just a random thought, something we didn't cover in this show. One thought, quickly around the table. Let's start, Dr. Roy. You can say you don't have anything. It's fair.
I'm thinking about, there's been so much going on in the last week that I have to say that I'm very happy that lots of new Star Trek series are coming out, and I've been very pleasantly surprised by things like Star Trek Prodigy, which I really loved. It's a children's cartoon, but it's really amazingly drawn and wonderful, and I'm looking forward to Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and there's a new movie coming up, so I'm in heaven.
Okay, start Trekkie away. Okay, Christine, what do you got?
Ontario election is in a couple months.
Go for it.
If you want to help our government get reelected, get out there, knock on some doors, help your local candidate, because it's important for us to keep our presence in Ontario. The province is moving in the right direction, and it should continue to move in the right direction.
And on that note, thank you, Christine Elliott, for your longtime service in government. And she had a tough family life, and she had to slug it out through a very difficult situation with the pandemic. And she's stepping aside, and whatever she does, we wish her the best of luck. Robert.
I want to point out that a great actual liberal strategist, founder of a strategy group in Toronto, John Duffy, passed away.
Great book.
Past weekend, great author.
Far too young.
58 years old. He was a contemporary debater of mine. He was always a great guy. And he is actually my first wife's second husband. So I feel very badly for Jill.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yes. So, but John served the country. He was a liberal, but whatever he worked on, whatever he believed, it was for the betterment of the country. And no matter what side of the political spectrum you sit on, these are the kinds of people we want involved in public policy. And it's really a great loss for the political classes beyond the personal loss for the family.
Yeah, absolute brilliant mind, no doubt about it. And I read that. Title just skips me, but what a great book that was. I just want to give a shout out. Of all things, I'm going to congratulate Jason Kenney. We talked about Russia, Ukraine on the weekend. He walked into Jason Kenney. He walks into a Russian Orthodox church to actually show his support for the Russian people. The people may not be Putin admirers or whatever. Just as a state, just as we protected our Chinese population in Canada from any backlash over the virus over the last little while. He went in, and because nobody was talking about it, he wanted to make a statement to say, listen, don't punish the Russian people for the actions of their leaders or their leadership. They're as persecuted as much as anybody. It's beyond their, it's the great degree can be beyond their control, and trying to overthrow a communist type of government is not the easiest thing on earth. It takes an enormous amount of courage and bravery. But Kenny, that was such a Jason thing. It's something, whoever our next leader is on the federal level should take a lot of notes from Jason Kenney about re-engaging with our ethnic populations in any way, shape, and form, and getting dialogue with them, because boy, those were voters that we've been gradually letting go of. We got to get them back. They belong in the conservative tent easily. So Jason, good job. On that note, we're going to wrap it up. This was a really good discussion. Nice to have everybody up. Dr. Roy looks like he's going to go to sleep any minute. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you to our viewers. We'll be doing this again really soon. Take care, everybody. Good night. Good day.